All of us need a bit of luck in our lives, don't we? I was particularly fortunate during my early career to have come under the influence of several very significant people. First, my father, Dr Mew. He was not only an orthodontist, but he was also a great philosopher, and he stirred an interest in me to want to know the reasons why things go wrong, or indeed, even on the rare occasions they seem to go right. I started my dental education really because I was inspired by him. And I went to University College Hospital in London, where I spent the usual 5 years studying to become a dentist. During that period, the Orthodontic department was headed by Professor Willie Grossman. He was a very deep thinker and had a very broad capability. He was also a great surgeon. I watched him on several occasions do really quite delicate surgery. But essentially, it really spurred my interest in orthodontics. And at the age of 1920, I was actually using appliances to correct orthodontic cases. Professor Grossman had come from Austria, where he had studied under the German philosophers the system of treatment which at that time was called functional treatment. They were all inspired, I think, by Virgo and Dresen, who in the 1930s had produced an appliance called the Monoblock, which he found could correct overjets. Overjets are when the upper teeth stick in front of the lower teeth. He found that fitting this appliance, which he called the Monoblock, would pull back the upper teeth and push forward the lower teeth, but at the same time cause a small bony change. And he achieved some quite remarkable results. And a lot of people in Europe began copying him, particularly the Germans and the Austrians. Professor Grossman then immigrated to England when Adolf Hitler took over Austria, and started to teach orthodontics at University College. I, therefore, was one of the very first students in the whole of England to be introduced to these strange appliances they called functional appliances. After my graduation, I became fascinated with orthodontics and set up my own orthodontic practice. I also had the opportunity of studying my father's own work. And by looking at records of his cases, I gained an awful lot of knowledge about why some cases worked and some cases didn't work. And once again, that set me thinking. I was being given an education which was telling me this is that and that is that. And yet I could clearly see that it was nothing like as simple as that. There was a wide range of variety going on. I then developed an appliance which essentially was the same as the Monoblock that I'd been taught by Professor Grossman, but this one I called the BioBlock. It was slightly different in that the Monoblock used to be loose in the mouth, whereas the BioBlock appliances I made were clipped onto the teeth. Also, the Monoblock was a huge block of acrylic which left virtually no room for the tongue. So I hollowed it out and joined the two halves of the wire to enable the patient to be able to place their tongue on the palate, which I thought was important. Shortly after that, anxious to improve my knowledge, I decided to go into orthognathic surgery. That is, when you use surgery to correct the position of the top and bottom jaw. This is quite major surgery, and I was fortunate enough to gain a place in the, I think, most significant teaching hospital in the world on that particular subject, which was Queen Victoria Hospital at East Grinstead. There I came under the influence of several very famous surgeons, including Archibald McIndoe and Terence Ward. They taught me a huge amount about what could be achieved with surgery in correcting the jaws. And one interesting thing I observed is that they were getting really brilliant results by pulling all the jaws and the teeth forward. Clearly, this was improving the appearance of the patient. Although, interestingly, orthodontists were tending to pull everything back. Now, clearly, this was another contraindication which confused me. And I said to myself, one of those has to be right and the other has to be wrong. They can't both be right. Again, this plunged me into a huge amount of research over a very long period of time. Gradually, I began to realize that the more forward growth you can achieve, the better the appearance of the face. I then began looking at why some of the faces tended to drop down rather than grow forward, and realized it was a very simple problem. It just depends on how much the child leaves their mouth open. Children who keep their mouths closed grow forward. Children who leave their mouths open grow downwards. And the ultimate consequence of that is actually very severe. People who hang their mouths open a lot will grow up to be very unattractive. And I only wished more parents knew this. However, I then switched my plan, so to speak, slightly. Rather than just trying to reposition the jaws, I started working on correcting the actual posture of the children concerned. And I developed an appliance which was only comfortable when the child closed their mouth. It took me years and years to perfect this, but it is now in use all over the world. And it's very simple in concept. It clips into the upper jaw, and all the time the child keeps their mouth shut, it's completely comfortable. But if they drop their jaw, it bumps on the gum and is uncomfortable. Very simple in concept, just rather difficult to certainly think up in the first place, but even to apply in these days. But there were other problems I could see. The principal one was that many children tend to keep their tongue between their teeth too much. You can always recognize this because those children will tend to have lisps. They'll talk a little bit like this, and you'll see their tongue between their teeth. This will always damage the way the teeth meet. Essentially, it tends to make the front teeth meet more than the back teeth, but there are variations. Sometimes the tongue comes forward and the back teeth meet, but there's a big gap between the front teeth. All these problems are caused not by the pushing of the tongue so much, it's just where the patient keeps their tongue at rest most of the time. And I then developed appliances which in the same way would make it uncomfortable if the child keeps their tongue in the wrong place. It's very difficult to teach someone to keep their mouth shut or to put their tongue on the palate where it should be. But using these extra appliances, it's much easier. And that really, I think, is the reason for the success of orthotropic treatment, which essentially is aimed at correcting the growth. You have to remember that it will only work if it is applied during the period of growth, which is why we attempt to start treatment as soon as we can see a problem. And this may be as early as 3 or 4 years old. More usually, we will start at 6 or 7, but it's important not to delay treatment after 8. Even if you aren't going to need treatment, it is wise to get the opinion of someone who understands posture. By and large, these will be the orthotropists. Orthodontists in general prefer to wait for treatment until the child has stopped growing about the age of 12, 13, 14. But orthotropists will usually prefer to start much earlier, and if you have any concerns, I think you should get advice while your child is still quite young.